Maybe we start from kind of, if I was to frame what I view as the problem, you tell me if you think this is a problem that is accurate enough based on your experience and stuff like that. But the way I see it is that AI used to be something that was confined to the like innovation teams or the marketing teams or, you know, contact center. Like a small part of a business was essentially focusing on doing something with AI very narrowly. And now what seems to have happened is that the AI conversation has moved from the sort of like boots on the ground to the boardroom. And so now every chief executive, every kind of board of directors, everybody is kind of looking at AI and saying, what are we going to do about it? And the couple of things that come to mind in terms of what we're going to do about it is, I think companies jump towards technology. What tech do we need? And secondly, they jump towards talent. What talent do we need? So it seems to me as though, and you're far closer to this than I am, but it seems to me as though businesses, large and small, are going through this period of thinking, how do we get our organization to a position where we can capitalize on AI? What talent do we need? How do we bring them in? How do we work together? And all that kind of stuff. Is that a fair kind of like summary of where we are?
Yeah, I would say so. I would also add to that by saying the reason why that conversation is now in the boardroom is because there's obviously a massive fear of missing out at board level, definitely amongst the C-suite, CEOs in particular. And a lot of these CEOs, by the way, are people who have probably never even used AI and, you know, in their life. They might never have, you know, even put a prompt into ChatGPT or Claude. But they see their competitors and, you know, using it, or they've heard stories and they want to be involved as well. So there's that's what's sort of driving a lot of the pressure. It's that fear of missing out. AI is everywhere. We should be involved in this. And then what tends to happen is I actually see it a little bit differently, because the talent piece, I don't think is something from my perspective that it's kind of like rushed into necessarily. It depends on the organization. But what tends to happen from a talent side of things is they see the fix to the problem as like a unicorn hire, essentially. And they'll come to someone like myself and say, you know, we need to hire a chief AI officer or an AI engineer that does the job of, you know, 15 people, you know, when you break down the JD that they've gotten from wherever it is. And it's obviously unrealistic. So there's that. I find a lot of my role and my colleagues' roles is unpicking that conversation. And it's very different to hiring conventional sort of tech roles in that sense. You know, I grew up as a software recruiter by trade. I've got a degree in information systems and I've been doing this job for 20 years. And the AI side of things that I've been doing probably for the last 3 or 4 years is, I think, infinitely more complex because of this, because it's early, because a lot of companies tend to not know what it is that they want or how to get there. There's that complexity. The role maturities aren't there. You know, like, what do we call this person out there in the market? There's the job titles aren't even like sort of settled down like they are in, you know, sort of wider places like in across technology. And as well, when you take a step back and detach and actually look at what AI is when you're implementing it on a company-wide scale, it's actually not a tech project. You know, it's a transformation project. It's transformation and change is basically what it is. And the problem that I see a lot of companies getting into hot water really quickly around is that they see the word AI, they think it's tech, and they start off with the tools, and they start off by saying, right, we've got this amazing, it might not be ChatGPT, it could be something specific to a very niche domain, and there's this sort of AI tool that they can bolt onto the business, and they start with the tool, and then they try and ram it into the company. And they try and think, right, where can we use this tool, you know, and get some ROI from it? And I think that's the wrong way of looking at artificial intelligence in general. I think you should start with, you know, understanding what the problem is, understanding what the workflow is, and, you know, if AI is even the answer to that problem, and then it might just be something as simple as automation, for example, that actually fixes a problem. It might not be anything AI related at all. But then if it is, then you have to do that sort of foundation piece to actually understand who's involved, how to go through that transformation piece, how to affect change, which is really, really painful for different organizations and in different industries, because they're having to basically rewrite the operational workflow of their entire company a lot of the time to actually implement this sustainably. And that's what a lot of companies don't actually realize. So I think there's a hell of a lot of work that businesses have to do before they even get to thinking about who do we hire. And that's when they come a cropper, they sort of, jump either right to the talent piece, and they come to me trying to hire a unicorn, which doesn't exist, or they have completely missed the whole, transformation piece, and they haven't done any of the sort of foundational elements that would allow for that change and transformation project to actually be effective. So that's what I see, a lot of recurring patterns in my day-to-day work. A lot of my role at the moment is diagnosing these problems from business leaders who come to me with their hair on fire, and I'm trying to reverse engineer what it is that they're asking me for. So it's a lot of it is kind of like diagnostics. It's kind of like I imagine what a doctor would do is sit down with a patient and they're saying, "Oh, my knee's hurting me." You sort of have to backtrack and actually find out actually what is it that you actually need. And a lot of those businesses are coming to me saying the exact same phrase, which is, "We need to do AI." But a lot of the times they just don't know what that means or how to even get there. And that's what I spend a hell of a lot of my week trying to solve.
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? Because as you mentioned, the kind of like C-suite is the fear of missing out, and it's a lot of peer competition. So the CEO of a company that's a competitor of ours is doing something, and this, that, and the other. It's very much driven by that sort of stuff, isn't it? And it's like, even though the right solution might be just to pause for a second, and we have these discussions ourselves, it's like, we want a chatbot. I say, okay, what do you want that for? Oh, we want it to, because we need a chatbot. I say, okay, well, what's it going to do? And all that kind of stuff. And it's the same sort of thing, really, which is like, take a step back, figure out what the problem you're trying to solve. But the problem is that ChatGPT has taken the world by storm, basically. And it doesn't matter what you say, sometimes there's just this desire to push the button and to just get going. So like, what is it that you could advise businesses on that are in that situation? They've got this knee-jerk reaction type of thing going, which is that we need to do something about AI. I mean, loads of businesses do have an AI strategy now. I was reading something the other week which was saying that I think something like 70% of SMBs have what they would call an AI strategy. So they've got kind of strategies in place. Sometimes they'll bolt it onto as an addition to somebody else's job, or sometimes they'll run straight to hire, a head of AI or whatever. What are the things when you say that, you need to slow down first of all and think objectively? What are some of the things that you advise companies have in place before just jump into the question of hiring that unicorn?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, 70% seems obscenely high to me.
It seems obscenely high to me as well, but that's the figure I saw. Yeah.
I haven't. My experience is like it's way lower than that. But yeah, I suppose I'm on the sort of pointy end of different industries and stuff. So my data might be a little bit skewed. But yeah, essentially, the things that I would advise companies to actually get in order, first of all, before really tackling it, is when you look at AI and AI transformation, I think in terms of how to implement it on a team or a company-wide scale, it's essentially processes, it's data hygiene and how clean that data is, where it's kept, what it looks like, and also culture as well. So that's what I meant by it is this sort of transformation and change element. It's people, it's culture, it's data, it's processes, it's the whole thing, really. And I think it's for that reason that I wouldn't necessarily sit AI transformation under like the CTO necessarily, and a lot of the times that's where it gets sort of lumped, and a lot of those people are built a lot of the time to, go straight for the shiny tool and try and like use this cool thing that's flavor of the month type thing. So yeah, I think the things that I would definitely advise is for companies to do some sort of AI readiness assessment, which I would definitely advise. We work with businesses to do a lot of that stuff, and we obviously we're recruiters by day, but we team up with a couple of really outstanding individuals from UKAI, which we're a member, and they do workshops. They sit down and do sort of strategy meetings with board leaders, and essentially what that is it's a sort of a process that you go through to understand like where the organisation is up to at the moment, what the appetite for AI is, what the understanding is, where the data is, and then you sort of end up with a sort of scoring matrix of whether you're ready or not ready at all, essentially, for under different categories. It's quite a detailed thing. The report that comes out of that ends up being like sort of like 100 pages. So it is very, very detailed. And from that, you can then basically take the first steps of implementing AI, because that report will essentially highlight which areas are the hardest hitting and the sort of lowest risk. And what should happen from that is you should end up picking something that's potentially an AI project that is achievable in a shorter space of time. And that's another thing that I think businesses do with AI is that, when they think about use cases, they'll pick something that's like an 18-month project that's going to cost 2-3 million and the rest of it. I think that to get the momentum with AI in a business, you should be picking something that's like, I hate saying the phrase, like a low-hanging fruit, in terms of something that's easily achievable within weeks or a couple of months, and that can be a proof point for the rest of the organization, and then you can use that to sort of build momentum. So yeah, but the general things that I would advise is to understand what your processes are, what your data is like, because obviously AI, it doesn't work without data. Is it structured or unstructured? How clean is it? Does it need to be, updated? Understanding what the culture of the business is like, who's involved, what sort of people need to be involved across different areas of the business as well. And quite often as well, what I see is the companies that the winners, the companies who are actually doing really great stuff with AI that we've been talking to, not necessarily the ones that just got access to the biggest models, but they're the ones who know how to plug AI into their everyday work so that their staff actually use it. And, they're looking at it from a different angle and not what we all see in the headlines about, AI is just coming for everyone's job, which is obviously one side of the coin. But a lot of these companies look at it as that, like, it's not replacing people, it's replacing the boring parts of their job so that they can finally do the bit that they're actually paid for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that part of the misunderstanding, I think, of AI is that companies think that just implementing an AI solution adds value. But if you're serving, let's say, 100,000 customers a week, and then you deploy an AI solution that takes up 50,000 of those interactions per week, but you've still got everything else that you had when you were serving 100,000 people with just people. So you've still got the same staff base, you've still got the same technology, you've still got the same infrastructure, you've still got the same overheads. The AI has just replaced some value. It hasn't given you anything additional, unless now you're able to do things like 24/7 service, and now you're serving 20,000 customers a week round the clock, which you weren't doing before, or something like that. I think one of the mistakes I've seen is that just deploying it doesn't necessarily equate to value unless you can show over and above just replacing what was already there, it's giving you something extra. And it's like going back to what you were saying in terms of like selecting the right use case and starting small and proving the value. I think that's one of the most important things, isn't it? Because, otherwise you're in a situation where 18 months later, 1.5 million, however many pounds later, you're in the exact same place as you were before.
Yeah, the horse is bolted by that point. The genie's out of the bottle. No one in your company believes in AI anymore because they've been stuck in this 18-month project that has had like zero, ROI, essentially. So yeah, I think that the first ones when it comes to like AI adoption that I've seen anyway are almost always manual workflows that people hate doing, essentially. And that then comes the sort of like internal knowledge access, and it's only after that really that companies are like sort of like ready for automation and deeper conversational interfaces. I think you're thinking about chatbots and all the rest of it, and I think if you try and skip those steps, the adoption just collapses, and you've sort of lost the room at that point.
Yeah, definitely. What are you seeing in terms of, let's take all the companies that you've worked with recently and let's put them through all the AI readiness assessment stuff. Let's figure out where they should be spending their time and effort. Let's find that initial kind of project. Then let's get to the conversation about, okay, we need the people to do this. What are some of the most common roles that you're seeing being hired for at the moment? When a company's took the right steps, did the right thing, what are the most common roles in the AI space that you're currently seeing being in demand?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends on the company. I mean, we're a global business, so we hire for companies across the US, but also the UK and in Australia as well. And they're slightly different in each of those sort of three locations. I think the US is much further forward, both in the sense of talent density, the attitude to like risk capital is much higher. There's money swishing around the market, and they seem to be a lot more advanced, especially when it comes to startups and scale ups. They seem to be a lot more further forward. So the role types over there are a little bit more advanced, and especially from a technical perspective. But if I look at the UK market, would it be more helpful to concentrate more in the UK if that's where most of your audience?
Either. I mean, our biggest audience is actually in the US, so US, UK, okay. Europe, global, yeah. So yeah, I think it'd be useful to understand a bit about maybe what the differences or similarities are between the UK and US, and whether or how that impacts the rest of the world.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll try and keep it succinct because I could probably talk for an hour just about that one question, to be honest. So there's a lot to go at there. But so we've been working in the US market since 2021, January 2021. So we've been doing it a fair few years now. And we work a lot with, Fortune 250, Fortune 500 companies, but the bulk of the action that we see in the US at the moment are from what we would call tier one VC-backed startups and scale-ups. It's where a lot of the money is in the market. And, these are companies who are obviously building tools and doing a lot of exciting things, and that ranges from sort of seed stage all the way up to Series C, Series D type companies that are a bit more mature. So the bulk of the roles that we see for those companies are definitely on the technical side of things. So machine learning engineers of all shapes and sizes and levels, and also obviously AI engineers as well. So the one thing I would say about the recruitment aspect in general is that hiring for AI roles is nothing like hiring for software roles. So we're looking for people that understand modeling and data and product and experimentation and creative problem solving. And even within the one role type of a machine learning engineer, there are obviously many different types of ML engineer across that market. So we tend to see a lot of AI and ML engineers in the US market. The differences between, from a candidate perspective, is that the US market, the salaries are obviously a lot higher. Cost of living is a hell of a lot higher compared to the UK. To give you an example, obviously it depends on where this these people are sort of based, but typically we would hire ML engineers in the US market that are anywhere from sort of like 180k to 300k on a base, and then they add equity on top of that, and all of a sudden their total comp, as they would say, which is a total package, can be anywhere like sort of like 400, 500, 600k. So big packages. And I heard someone say something the other day, like a peer of mine in my network, that actually stuck with me, and it did resonate. So I thought I'd share it. Is he basically likened AI recruitment to an arms race, and he basically said that the clients that we hire for are all at war. We're like the arms dealers, and the candidates are the weapons, because when you get the top tier talent, especially ML engineers, and especially in the US, these are candidates who have come from like really top graduate schools, your MITs and Stanfords and Harvards and all the rest of it. But they've also got that sort of really cool blend of maybe being like a startup, worked in a top startup before, and maybe had also larger organisation experience. They might have been a founding engineer previously, or maybe had their own startup as well. So these people command like really high salaries and are often the most technically gifted.
Wasn't there something where? Sorry. Wasn't there something where? Wasn't it Meta that offered something like $1 million salary for an engineer recently?
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on, to be honest. There's a lot of that between Meta and OpenAI and Anthropic. There's a lot of sort of like that to and fro, and specifically, I've seen that more on the research side of things. So obviously, AI is sort of like one of the only parts of the technology market that's kind of split between the sort of industry side and the academic side. So a lot of these businesses, these startups that I've just mentioned, have researchers as well. And for top researchers within a specific field in AI, especially when you get into like deep domain expertise. So for instance, we're hiring for music, so audio AI startups in the US at the moment. And when you start getting into like really, really niche experience like that, these are people who have got PhDs in music or speech and artificial intelligence, who've worked as ML engineers at various startups. They command huge salaries. But for the companies like Meta and OpenAI, for example, some of the figures that have been bandied around are absolutely crazy. And as well, what happens with them is that when you start getting into the sort of leadership side of things, OpenAI and Microsoft and Google, DeepMind and all the rest of it, they actually understand something key, that when you get to a leadership level, you can't just go out to the market and start hiring, leaders from other organizations, because quite oftentimes the best leaders have already started their own startup. So what you've probably seen, and a lot of people have seen in the market, is these big tech companies are started over the last few years of going through what we would call an acqui-hire strategy, which is basically to say, right, we want access to that CEO or that founder of a startup and his leadership team. And we can give or take some of the ML engineers or AI engineers below them, but we want access to that team. The only way to get access to it is to actually acquire the company. And that's what we're seeing a lot of, these AI startups being gobbled up by much larger organizations like Microsoft and Google and Amazon and Meta and OpenAI and all the rest of it, because they want access to the best talent. So it is really hand-to-hand combat out there for the best AI and ML talent, especially in the US market, but specifically places in like the high concentration in San Francisco and obviously New York as well. And then when you get outside of that, places like Boston and stuff like that, where you've got obviously MIT and all the rest of it. These are key locations as well, and obviously Seattle and everywhere like that. So yeah, that's what I would say about the US market. More advanced, higher salaries. Definitely where the party's at when it comes to AI and the smartest minds and everything, compared to the UK and Australia or other locations.
And largely coming from like startups and scale ups fundamentally. So you're not seeing as much demand from like enterprises like the Bank of Americas of the world and so forth. It's mainly coming from the startups and scale-ups that are building the enablement technology. Am I right in that thinking?
No, well, that's just where our client base lies, essentially. That's right. Kind of like where our portfolio lies. I would probably say in our US portfolio of clients, probably say as high as 80% of the roles that we would deal with would be across tier one VC-backed startups and scale-ups. Yeah. But we deal with much bigger organizations as well, who do hire AI and ML roles. And obviously the flip side to those organizations is that they've got deeper pockets, and they've obviously got a wealth of data swishing across their organization that they could really capitalize on, especially in finance. So like companies like JP Morgan, for example, they've been going all chips in on AI for a while. They've got like a big team of AI professionals that probably most people wouldn't understand, especially in places like New York. Several hundred, probably nudging, I would probably say maybe even just over 1,000 now. AI and ML staff across different role types, including data science and product managers and stuff like that as well. So yeah, bigger organizations have got the deeper pockets and probably have got the bigger impact internally, so they would like to think, when it comes to AI. But quite often from a candidate perspective, they're viewed as sort of like slower moving beasts as such. And that's why a lot of top talent, in my opinion and in my experience, tends to favour startups a lot of the time, because they can get involved early. The upside financially for them is much greater, and if they've got an interest in that domain, such as healthcare, for example, obviously they're really drawn to that, because they believe that by joining a future unicorn AI startup in healthcare, that they could have a much better and bigger impact on the domain that sort of lights them up,
Yeah, definitely. It's as if you've been peeking at the schedule for this podcast, because literally, I don't know if it'll come out before this episode airs or whether it'll be just after, but it's just been recorded, which is with Georgios Tserdanelis, who is one of the conversational AI leaders at JP Morgan. So he's one of those people that you were just referring to.
Right. Yeah. No, it makes sense. I've been following JP Morgan for a while. A lot of people are sleeping on what JP Morgan have been doing from an AI perspective, because one of the things that's impressed me about it is that whilst a lot of finance, banking companies have been a little bit hesitant with AI, they've gone like all chips in, and they've thrown a lot of money at it. And they've got a huge team, and a lot of sort of movement in their team as well, in terms of like hiring and letting people go, and sort of projects firing up and winding up. So they're not scared to innovate and try and test and fail, which I think is a good thing, because we need companies doing that across all different industries. Talking about sizes of teams, most people don't actually know that, like companies like Apple, for example, they've got like 4,500 AI employees. People just don't understand how much money is involved in this and how big some of these teams are. And Apple's probably the smallest out of the big tech companies in terms of like the amount of people working on AI and stuff. So yeah, just huge amounts of like capital, salaries, investment being swishing around, especially the US market. If I move on to the UK side of things, the UK is sort of, it's still got an absolute pedigree when it comes to obviously our universities are very well thought of. We've got a couple of really good universities here that are really well thought of from a research perspective. But quite oftentimes what you'll see is those top researchers are actually, they'll graduate and then they've already been poached by one of the big tech companies and they move to the US. So our problem as a nation in the UK is to try and keep a hold of our brightest AI minds. Also think that one of the things that's difficult for us as a country, and to all my Scottish family, I mean the UK, they'll probably be like, "What do you mean country?" But the problem that we have as the United Kingdom is that we have a completely different attitude to risk capital here. And you see that with a lot of big tech companies who have grown and have been like the darlings of our sort of tech scene here, especially companies like Monzo, for example, and Revolut. These guys it's good to start a company in the UK, it seems, but then when you get to a certain size and you want to scale, like floating in the UK just doesn't seem to be an option because of obviously how the government's run and our attitude to risk, and it just seems to be quite a challenging environment. So what ends up happening there again is it goes back to the talent brain drain. Is it ends up going to the US? That's jobs, talent. Where AI is concerned, researchers and projects, it ends up being moved to the US. So I do think that we're a little bit behind in that sense. Having said that, we've still got a really great startup scene here in the UK and a lot of really cool stuff happen. It's just not in the same scale from a talent density perspective. We're obviously a smaller nation. We've obviously got a fifth of the size of population of the US. So there's going to be that, and there's going to be that challenge. But I do think that there's some way to go for us to actually keep the best people in AI here in the UK and provide opportunities for them. And I think that needs a bit of a rethink when it comes to how to do that. So again, going back to the differences, UK is obviously smaller salaries compared to those roles that I mentioned in the US. You need to be in and around London or work for a London-based company to get the highest salaries. But even then, they're nowhere near in comparison to what it would be in somewhere like New York, for example. So there's the sort of financial draw as well, I suppose. But what I have seen though that I think is really good in the UK is companies who are maybe not your AI startups, but who are still wanting to do really cool things with AI and who are maybe have been around a while. One of our clients is a software company down in Guildford, and they've been around since 1990, and they do software for the oil and gas sector. And they had a really forward-thinking director of artificial intelligence who then became the CEO, and one of the probably only examples I've seen of that happen really, really quickly. So what they ended up with is a CEO who really believed in AI and got it and wrote the AI strategy and sort of came to me to essentially build the team. And my point is, what I'm seeing is a lot of those types of companies who are probably not necessarily AI companies, but who are trying to implement AI on top of existing systems and legacy software, for example. They're building whole teams at once. So when they decide to go for it, they really go for it in a big way, and then they come want to hire a couple of AI ML engineers, a couple of data scientists, maybe a software engineer to help with the integration piece. It could be like product managers, for example, if they're big enough. And that's been really quite refreshing for me to see from a UK perspective, obviously being from the UK myself. So yeah, that's kind of the UK in a nutshell. And then looking at Australia, which is obviously the sort of third location that we're involved in, I'd say is a much, much smaller beast. Only a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I think there was only like 3,800 AI professionals across the whole of Australia, which is basically mainly Sydney and Melbourne. and it's much smaller market, and obviously heavily reliant on immigration to satisfy the needs and stuff. It is getting better, but I would say that if the UK is 2 years behind the US, then Australia, I would say, is probably 2 years behind the UK in that respect as well. So it's very, very early days over there. OpenAI's just sort of like started to have a real presence on the ground there only, in the last couple of months. And, some UK companies and consultancies that I know and I've recruited for in the past have sort of started having a presence over there and are doing some cool things. But it's definitely early days where Australia is concerned.
Yeah. I mean, from the US, I can see, that's where it's all happening, isn't it? And there's not going, if you're in the US and you're in this space, it's like the question of like, how do you improve it is kind of like pointless asking, really, because it's absolutely thriving. In the UK, I think it's kind of a very interesting kind of space because, apart from DeepMind, there isn't a terrible amount of great examples of AI companies that are, really getting to that global kind of level. And when you've got the US, which would pay you, those types of salaries, becomes very kind of like obvious that that's a temptation. I remember when I went to uni at Teesside Uni, and I remember at the graduation ceremony many moons ago. I'm surprised I can remember it. But I remember one of the tutors or whatever was giving this speech to all of these people graduating from Teesside Uni, and they said, "You'll be very tempted to move away, but please stay," basically was the message, because we can't improve this place and we can't make it reach its potential if we don't have the talent. And I'd already put a deposit down on a flat in Kent, so I was already off down London way, and I haven't kind of moved back, basically. And I kind of am reminded a little bit of that in this situation, which is the UK have got some ambition. There's a partnership with NVIDIA that was announced recently. They're going to build a bunch of data centers in the northeast, and they're going to try and provide the infrastructure to give the UK a fighting chance of becoming some kind of notable character on the AI scene. Even though, for me, the cynic in me thinks, well, this is just going to be inference compute for OpenAI and Anthropic and such, and Google or whatever. But needless to say, the UK has begun to make some noise about trying to make the UK a more hospitable place for AI innovation and AI talent. What are some of the things that the UK could do to try and keep hold of that talent, or to try and foster more innovation, to build more companies that are AI native companies and all that kind of stuff? Like, what are your perspectives on that?
Yeah. What you just said there resonated so much for me, because I went to Newcastle Uni and I lived there for 8 years, and they said it's pretty much the same thing to us as well. And it is a problem in those sorts of places, the sort of brain drain. But you can scale that up though you can scale that up to the country level though, can't you? Because it's what we experienced in those two specific locations is being experienced on a more macro scale in the UK, with people going over to the US because they're going to get paid more and it's more happening and kind of like innovative place or whatever. So it's like, it seems to be it's not necessarily a town problem. It seems to be a nation problem in the UK. Yeah, I would say so. Look, I've got a real perspective on this, because as part of our membership to UKAI, I get invited down to do roundtables at the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And the last couple of times that I was there, although it sounds impressive, it was actually quite a sobering experience, because I actually truly realised how little the government and the people in Westminster actually know, understand or care about AI. It's very, very little. We were having comments from some MPs saying, well, why should we bother? Why should we care about AI? My constituents are asking me to fix potholes, and if I talk to them about AI, that won't get me re-elected. It's that sort of attitude that we're sort of dealing with in government. And then you compare that to some of the politicians in the US, although many of them are of questionable character, no doubt, but some of them really get it, and their attitude is like they understand that this is an arms race that they're in on a country level, and talent plays such a huge part of that. But their attitude in the US is like, how much money do you need, and what do you need me to do, and I'll get out of the way. And it's really like that. It's the difference. Whereas our government is sort of so wrapped up in red tape and bureaucracy, it makes things so difficult for itself to achieve that. But yeah, I think for the UK, I don't think that we have a talent problem, to be honest. When it comes to AI, I think we have a usage problem in general. So I think we produce great people. We have absolutely world-renowned educational institutes that are admired the world over. But when we produce great people, talking specifically in terms of AI here, what happens then is they're either exported or we bury them in organisations that don't know what to do with them. Essentially, that's what I've seen. At least, and I think if we paid them properly, and if we gave them real problems to solve, because that's when we talk about real top 1% of talent here, like the researchers and ML engineers, specifically data scientists. These people are sort of obsessed with the core of the problems that they're trying to solve. They want to actually change humanity with the work that they do. And if we don't give them real problems, they'll go somewhere where they're given those problems. And like I said, stop wrapping everything in red tape. And I think we'd be in a very different, a different position as a country, essentially. But some of the things that I think what the government can do as well is that, buy from UK AI companies for a start, help them instead of just talking about them. You could, our government could be doing a lot more in terms of buying from our UK based AI companies. Also think that they could be doing things like making public sector data usable in a safe and well-governed ways, so that startups, for example, can then build on top of that. We don't do any of that in the UK at the moment. And also, one of the things that I've seen over and over again in places like Westminster, and we've all experienced it in some way, shape or form, is a sort of knee-jerk reaction and sort of, going from one extreme to the other when it comes to policy every sort of like 6 months. So nobody actually knows whether they're coming or going, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And, what we definitely should stop doing on a government level, I think, is announcing things like world-leading frameworks that actually don't translate into anything. So, what government tends to do is we tend to treat AI purely as an existential risk problem, whilst ignoring the basic productivity upside, essentially. So yeah, that's some of the things that sort of spring to my mind. But I do think, unfortunately, in the UK, that we just have a lot of people in government who just don't get it, and unfortunately, as a nation, we are always going to be playing second fiddle to places like the US, because of that. If you look at Trump, for example, what he does, whoever's in his ear about AI, he gets it, and he knows that if they build the data centers, they have the energy in order, they have the funding there, they keep the talent in the US, then they will succeed in the future as a nation. And I think that's got so many connotations, geopolitical, financial. The stakes are absolutely high, and I just don't think that the UK government even realise that what's at stake, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I think the US think of it as as everything typically is in the US, it's a battle with Russia and China. Yeah. It's like, we've just got to beat Russia and China to this AI superpower. But I think the knock-on effect of that means that they prioritize it. They're thinking at it from a kind of like global geopolitical kind of or global political kind of perspective, which is that if someone's going to have an AI superpower, it better be us. So that's partly the motivation. But at the same time, what comes with that, I find, or at least I theorize, is that if you can, even though I think there's going to be long-term problems with OpenAI given the financial situation, the forecasts, etc. But needless to say, regardless of that, rather, if you allow or foster an environment where AI companies can thrive and reach a large degree of scale, you will unlock all of the potential productivity that sits underneath that. So you put ChatGPT on the fingertips of every single US citizen, and you have it in the workplace, you have it in your personal life, and all of a sudden it's like, as it starts to mature, people are using it more and more, they're getting more and more done, they're saving more and more time. The productivity boost as a nation could be absolutely huge.
Absolutely huge, yeah. When you think of, like, I don't know if you've seen what countries like Singapore are doing with regards to AI. They're basically trying to upskill every citizen in the country, irrespective of age. They're making like access free to AI tools and AI training. That, I think that's the attitude you have to go at if we're really going to harness this world-changing technology that's sort of bringing about a pace of change that no one's ever experienced. We have to go all chips in on it. And I think that is one of the things that we could do as a country, definitely in the UK, is that we could actually teach modern AI skills you should be doing that in the classroom now.
Yeah.
I think about this with my own kids. My eldest daughter's 10. And I think, like, why aren't they teaching them about AI in the classroom at the minute? Why aren't they trying to think about the curriculum in terms of, working alongside AI as a sort of co-pilot, as a co-worker, to augment the skills of students, not see it as you can't use AI for, you're going to be cheating if you're cheating on your exam. But we need to rethink the curriculum so that we actually end up with future talent who actually know AI, are not scared of it, and they know how to, harness it. So I definitely think that's some of the things we can do. We can teach modern AI skills, not just like, data science from 2009, but upskill the sort of grey zone, the people who are like have been sort of like forgotten about. And I think that is, it's not about like turning everyone into ML engineers, by the way. That's like, it's like giving people like product managers that we were talking about, even ops people or analysts or designers, different industries, giving them the tools to actually use AI properly in their work and actually normalising AI as part of the job. And I think the media as well have a massive part to play in that. Like, stop scaremongering people. I know it's great for clicks and it sells newspapers and online and all the rest of it, but when people turn on the TV and all they hear about is AI's taking our jobs, AI's not good for us for this reason and that reason, they're going to be scared of it and they're less likely to actually use it. So I think that it's not just the government, but it's also the media, it's the schools, it's the employers, it's everyone having a sort of slightly different approach to this problem. And when you think of it in that sense, as a nation, we've really got our work cut out, because not a lot of that's happening at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. I think the same about my son. Like you kind of like went to the parents' evening the other week, and they're showing us what they've been working on and stuff like that. And literally, I remember doing the exact same thing when I was in school. It's the exact same stuff. They've got all the same books. They've got all the same sort of like, everything seems exactly the same. And I'm thinking, that was years ago. That, you know what I mean? Like,
I think that none of this stuff's going to matter. Like, none of this, and I have to keep that in check. And my wife's always saying to me, you can't say that to the kids, and I don't. But I do think that. I just think, like, why are we teaching this curriculum to those kids? Because in their world, when they grow up, none of that stuff's going to matter. A lot of the intelligence is going to be democratized, for the kids who are at school at the moment. So why aren't we preparing them for a world that are actually going to live in? Why are we preparing them for the world that we lived in? It's going to look nothing like that. So that's certainly something that keeps me awake at night, knowing what I know about the AI industry, and because I'm at the pointy end of it when it comes to talent and everything. It's something that I do worry about, because I just don't think we're preparing our kids for the world that they're going to walk into when they're 18, 19, 21. And therefore I worry about the country as well, because if we're not preparing the kids, then the talent of tomorrow is going to be en masse ill-equipped to actually deal with what's the type of world that they're going to live in from that perspective.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? I mean, we went away at the weekend, and while we were on the train, I had my iPad with us, and my son was he's getting into Minecraft and that kind of stuff. I think he's not playing Minecraft for 3 hours on the train. We'll do something else. So I thought, well, maybe we'll play Angry Birds. So we were just like, play just something to do together while we're on the train. So I thought, well, let's get Angry Birds up. So I'll get Angry Birds up, and I was teaching him how to play that and stuff like that. And what happens on this game, which is the same as all the games these days, is that you reach a certain point and it asks you for money, basically. Yeah. And I remember I had this conversation with him. I was saying, look, this game needs to make money. And so the way it makes money is it puts limitations on the game. So you have to pay to get past it, or pay to enhance what you can do in this part of the game. And I kind of like, as we were going through, I was trying to get him to spot times when that was happening, to the point where he ended up, when he was reaching it, he was just clicking the X now, because he knows that it's just trying to get money from him. But I thought stuff like that, stuff like, the book Hooked, like Nia Eyal's Hooked and stuff like that. Is it Nia Eyal? I can't remember. Anyway, it's like teaching them that the tools that they're using operate in a certain way, and this is how you use them in a way that sort of like safeguards your kind of like brain and all that kind of stuff. And it's exactly the same for AI. How do you use it? What do you use it for? What's it good at? What's it bad at? How does it behave? All that stuff is stuff that, as you said, it's going to exist whether people like it or not. And I think the sooner you can get kids kind of used to how it works and help them leverage it, it's like if they can leverage it when they're 7 and 10, imagine what their imagination will be like by the time they're 16, 17, 18 and they start building their own companies. If you grew up with it, you can see how you can use it to propel you even further forward into places that we can't even imagine.
Exactly, yeah. I was actually I done an interview for a US news channel, CNN, and they were asking me about this exact thing, and the news anchor was saying to me, "You're not worried about using AI, like AI is going to be used for cheating in exams?" And I was saying to him, I think you're completely missing the point about how powerful this technology is. We should be teaching the kids how to use AI to augment their skills, such that we then have to redesign the way that we actually assess them. So instead of giving them the standard exams that you and I grew up with, which is basically, let's face it, it's a Victorian way of doing things. Everyone has to, and it's not anything like what happens in the world of work either. You've got to sit by yourself. You've got to remember facts. AI will do all of that sort of stuff. You've got to work by yourself. Don't talk to anybody. Don't share ideas. It's basically the complete opposite of what you actually do at work. Yeah. Right? So why are we teaching the kids this really outdated way of thinking? Instead, what they should be doing is saying to them, right, we've got this project, use AI in this manner, this is how you prompt it, this is what it can do for you, use it to come up with something and use it as your sort of co-pilot, your co-worker, and see what you end up with, and then mark them on the output of that, and then that will teach them how to get the most out of AI. I think that the kids should be taught things like critical thinking. One of the biggest things that I think is going to be important for kids when my children grow up is like critical thinking and asking the right questions. If you know what questions to ask, and through critical thinking, I think you can arrive at that. But if we're not teaching the kids what questions to ask, they're never going to be able to use these systems properly. Maths, I think, will still continue to be extremely important. English or languages in general, obviously, because that's how a lot of these systems are designed at the moment, from a large language model perspective, things like linguistics, and all the rest of it. But on the other side of things, I think we should be doubling down on trying to teach our kids about like what it means to be human, like empathy, kindness. We should be teaching kids like more of that stuff and less about, remembering facts and then testing them in a really weird, sterile environment where they don't get to talk to anyone and they get punished if they look over someone's shoulder. It's
mad. It is mad. When you actually say it out loud, it sounds just
It's ridiculous. It's the status quo, though. It's what we've always had it that way, and therefore it's like, well, to question it, you're almost, seen as being mad. But for what we know about AI, we can see almost into the future, and that's what really scares me, because I'm looking at it going, we're not preparing anybody, any young person, well for this. And obviously I try and teach, especially my eldest, about AI and what it means and what sort of some of the dangers are of it and how you talk to it and stuff, and try and make it fun for them, so that they're at least inquisitive about it. But yeah, it's hardly anywhere in the school system, I think, in terms of thinking about AI or teaching kids about AI or even using the AI within an academic perspective. We're lucky enough to actually work with a very forward-thinking schools trust in the Northwest, and they are looking at that really seriously, and that's one of the companies that we've helped with the AI readiness piece. So they're at a very early stage of that, but I think they're in the minority, unfortunately. And if we could get that bit right, I think the UK as a country would be in a much better position, essentially. The other things that I forgot to mention when we were talking earlier on is things like, when we're talking about talent, look at our visa process. You think a lot of that side of things, when we're trying to attract people from overseas to come here, like for instance, we could be attracting people from the US, from MIT and from Stanford and all these places to come here and work if we had the right conditions. But also, if we had a visa process, it didn't feel like punishment, to go through the process. It should be easier, and you should be removing barriers for those types of high caliber, high talent, top 1% type AI and ML people to come to our country. But unfortunately, we just don't have the mechanism to do that, and it's very hard work for those types of people to come here at the moment.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you mentioned the status quo there, going back to that kind of like school system sort of thing, like the status quo. What happens to the status quo in business? It doesn't last that long, really. Even if it does last for a long time, like you could look at buying a house, that status quo process has existed for a while, but now there's things like purple bricks and this that are starting to disrupt it. But what ends up happening all the time is disruption emerges and sets a completely new bar for what the status quo is, and then more disruption, and then more disruption. And that's kind of what you want to instill as a country, is like, how can we improve this? How can we improve that? How can we make that better? Why do we do this? It's that kind of like process of innovation and disruption that leads to the next level in everything.
Yeah, but I also don't think that some industries are ready for that. So I'll give you an example. Take the legal industry, for example. Like, a lot of the top law firms in the UK have been around for like 150 years, for example. So they're really old companies. They might have new logos and all that sort of stuff, but the way that they're run from an operational perspective is actually really, really old school. Also, the way that a lot of the most senior decision makers in these companies are remunerated is that, they're basically the people who've been there the longest, are the senior partners. A lot of the people who could push the button on AI transformation, for example, are 5 years away from retirement, and they won't take a personal financial hit to be able to do it, because what it means essentially is, when you get really into the weeds on AI when it comes to different industries like the legal sector, for example, is if you really want to improve the processes and have high productivity, massive efficiency gains and everything, you need to move away from a time-based billing model to an outcome-based billing model. And when you're talking about a 150-year-old organisation, that means like drawing a line and starting again. And a lot of these senior partners, they'll go through the strategy piece and they'll get everything, all the ducks in a row. But when it comes to them actually pushing the button, they don't do it, because it's they're the sort of classic old white guys and girls in suits, and they sort of would rather take the paycheck and not take a personal financial hit than actually go through with that pain for 5 years before they actually retire. So there's all those nuances, I think, as well, per industry, it's not as simple as saying we need to do more with AI, we need to keep the talent here and all the rest of it, but there's a massive amount of pain that has to be gone through to actually reap the benefits when you start getting into understanding what each industry looks like. Legal example is a perfect example of that, because a lot of these businesses are really old. The processes are really backwards. They've not changed that much in the last sort of like 30 odd years, for example. And you imagine how painful it would be for a 150-year-old law firm who's got 2,500 employees to actually go from a time-based billing model to outcome-based. You know, they'd have to basically completely rewrite everything that they deal with in terms of like how to interact with clients and how they invoice. And it's like, it's a total, you know, it totally stumps them when they actually get down to actually thinking about it. And that's why I think it scares a lot of these companies off from actually going through with it, you know? Yeah,
which is why they're vulnerable though at the same time, because a startup that's got a bunch of qualified legal professionals that are trying to change the game don't care about that kind of stuff, you know? If you look at like, you know, the BPO industry is a great example, and even the contact center industry, two examples where contact centers are on license-based billing models. The more licenses you have, the more you pay. Whereas now, really, it's all about outcomes that the AI is generating. BPO organizations are exactly the same. You pay for bums on seats, you pay for people that answer phones and stuff like that. Whereas that's going to be replaced largely by AI. So that's under kind of threat. So it's kind of like those types of companies. It kind of forces you to, you know, reconsider. One of them that I was speaking with this year was saying that I can't name the names, but they were basically saying that the revenue was X, let's call it 10 billion. And profit was Y, let's call it 1 billion. And if they go through this AI transformation, they're going to have to reduce the workforce, and they can't charge what they currently charge because they can't charge for bums on seats anymore. So next, let's imagine that you wave a magic wand and what they want to do is already in place. So next year, they might do 6 billion in revenue, but they may make 2.5 billion in profit. So the profitability is far better, but the revenue goes down. So if you're the kind of company or the kind of CEO that prides themselves on that top level revenue, you don't want to go from 10 billion to 6 billion, because maybe your bonuses are all tied to that. Same as what you were saying before, personal kind of gain. Maybe your bonuses are tied to the revenue figure. And you're going to have to go through an awful lot of pain and heartache to, in at least one dimension, take a step back. But the profitability that exists when you've gone through that is far greater.
Yeah, and that's why it goes back to what we said right at the start. It's a transformation and change issue. It's at heart here. It's sort of like unpicking operational processes. It's choosing what's right for the organisation over what's right for the person. You know, but oftentimes these organisations are, you know, like obviously the CEO's got massive sway. And they can veto a lot of these ideas. So I think that things always take longer than we think. And so what we're seeing obviously in the news, and if anyone like myself is signed up to all these AI newsletters, I definitely think AI literacy is a complete fallacy, by the way. I don't think it actually exists. It's moving too fast. I've tried to keep up with it. But you're seeing the technology obviously change at like an alarming rate, but the adoption just isn't keeping up as quickly. And it's not just because the government isn't ready and the bureaucracy's there and, you know, we're not teaching it in schools. It's because, you know, things just take longer than we think. And when we're going through something this painful, I personally think it will be like at least 5 to 10 years before it's even remotely widely adopted. You know, if we can't even get Wi-Fi in trains in the UK, like in 2025, then I'm not holding out much hope of like AI being embedded in every sort of level of every organisation anytime soon. Yeah,
that means we'll both have jobs for a long while yet, which is good. And speaking of which, let's say that there's companies listening to this who are, you know, considering what they do and how they shape themselves and how they kind of bring in the right kind of talents. What's the best way for them to reach out to you and your company, Digitalent?
Yeah, so yeah, my email address is chris@digitalent.agency. They can email me. They can look me up on LinkedIn, Chris Morrow on LinkedIn. Our website is digitalent.agency. There's a whole host of information on there about obviously what we do, the talent side of things, but also the AI readiness advisory, as we call it, is one of the services on our website that people are welcome to read up on and obviously contact us about if they want any more information. Yeah, it doesn't cost them anything to obviously go through like a bit of a discovery and everything like that. We can walk them through stuff. So yeah, those are the best places to get in touch.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate your time. Very good conversation. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
No worries at all. Thank you very much for having me.
Nice one. Appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you again on the next one. Cheers now. Bye now.